what do you make of the pandemic's impact on on investor sentiments in Asia today? Let's start with Annabelle.
Impact on investor sentiments. I think a lot of people are still investing. That's the general sentiment from wealth managers. They're still investing. In fact, right now they're investing a lot in China. Even though China is recovering faster than everyone, which means its stocks aren't as cheap. But people are still picking it up in terms of tech stocks. The working from home theme is big. People are still looking to invest. So I don't think sentiment has died down completely. The headlines always say sell off has happened and everything, but I think over in Asia, people still remain quite optimistic in the market.
Okay, so there are bright spots that you are noticing. Nicholas, what about you? What are some of your thoughts on how is COVID impacting your reports and your analysis?
So I do agree with Annabelle. I think we see some strong players like gold, for example, physical gold and gold stocks, and these remain be quite strong, gold ETFs. And as for impact on COVID-19 and the way we report, I think right now it's all about seeing the way investors adapt to the volatile markets. And so previously, we were riding on a high, I think, late last year, coming into January. And so now with the volatility, I think there are a lot of new trends coming into play. So for example, we do have family offices rising up where, accredited investors are looking at unbiased advice. So we do see these trends coming up, and I think that these trends will be more pervasive post-COVID-19.
Okay, now I want to take a step back from what the reporting at Citywire and talk about your experience in working with other publications. And this is directed at you, Annabelle. Annabelle, you've worked with the Associated Press and the AFP. How do you think Citywire is reading and reporting on COVID, and how is it doing it differently from these wire outlets that you used to work at?
I think when I reported for AFP and AP, it was very much directed at a general news audience. So something like whatever you write, you have to make it as simple as possible. But for Citywire, I don't think that's the case. I think they like detail, they like data, they like graphs, they like charts. We try to put a lot of that into our stories. And also, a lot of terms, our readers are all from private banks or they run funds. So they are really very attuned to the finance industry. So a lot of times we don't really have to explain in our stories. We can use like short form. We basically assume that the reader already knows a certain level of knowledge about finance. So we don't have to like dumb it down for them in any sense.
You were talking about China earlier. Another topic that has been top of mind of regional public affairs and IR practitioners is the trade war between the United States and China. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York just recently reported that whether it was Washington, Beijing, or even a third-party country announcing tit-for-tat responses concerning the trade war, that in fact US businesses bore virtually all of the cost. And I think they reported it to the tune of about $1.7 trillion, wiped out from market capitalization in America. And that is equivalent, as you know, to the economies of Russia, to Canada, or South Korea, just wiped out like that. And the trade war has resulted in sharp market price declines, lowering returns on capital and investment rates. Both countries, US and China, they inked phase one of the trade deal in January. But that saw China agreeing to concessions in exchange for easing up of tariffs by the US. Talk about how Citywire helped to make sense of this trade war for your subscribers.
I think it has been on the top of the mind of a lot of like private banks' minds, because right now we're in the season of mid-year outlooks. So they're going to put out what they are watching, and every single private bank is saying the trade war. I think this week I was just in conversation with UBS's CIO, and I was asking her like about the US elections that are coming up in 4 months. Will that boost tensions? Are they keeping an eye on that as well? And she said it's too early to make like a Biden trade or a Trump trade at this point. But either way, it's going to be a tough on China stance. So I don't think the tensions are going away. People are saying that the phase one trade deal will still remain. No one's going to make any rash moves at this point. But I think the elections will only raise tensions in the sense that anti-China rhetoric will go up. We saw it today. I think China planes flew across Taiwan, and then US Navy planes made a flight across Taiwan to reinstate their stance. So all this is not helping. I think it will still be a huge issue.
Yeah, indeed. It's a whole plethora of issues now, right? Conflated. You have got the pandemic. You have got disputes against access to the Chinese financial market. You have got that new national security law for Hong Kong. So on these many fronts, in this whole kerfuffle between the US and China, where do you think are opportunities amid this whole relationship and tension that's going on?
Opportunities in terms of investments, or
in terms of investment, that's right.
Of investments. I think this whole reorganization of supply chains, that's a huge opportunity. As countries look to localize manufacturing, COVID has shown them that, you know, if you rely too much on the big powers like China or the US to supply your products, anything like a pandemic can throw that off. I think a lot of countries are looking at that. So other parts of Southeast Asia, this has started before COVID, but I think with COVID, it's speeding up that impetus. Like, we have to do this. We can't put ourselves in this situation again. So I think that's one big area, I think.
It's become a big risk consideration and risk factor that companies are when they consider how to navigate this whole thing. Now, one of the questions that I always ask leaders who have been on this program is their organization's sense of purpose, and that sense of purpose in society today. I asked this of Duke NUS, I asked this of Zalora, and I asked this when I was speaking with the communications chief of A-Star Singapore. I do this for two reasons. You know, first, I know that every single one of them who were invited to this program, they can give me an answer that exemplifies how their organizations have played a bigger role in society that go beyond the profit motive to make a meaningful impact on people and the planet. Yet at the same time, we have seen in recent years how the degree of confidence and trust in business and business leaders has reached a dramatic low point. Now, what do you think is the role of finance in redefining capitalism today? Nicholas or Annabelle, any one of you?
Yeah, Annabelle, you can go first if you want.
I mean, on Citywire's part, I think what we can do is be as transparent as possible. So there are a lot of funds coming up in the markets right now. We do our due diligence, we check their fund fact sheets, make sure what the managers are saying actually shows up in their numbers. I think capitalism will always be around. I mean, COVID has put a focus on sustainability. It has completely weeded out the companies that are, for instance, investing in things that are generally frowned upon. For instance, like mining, that kind of thing. But I feel it also gives purpose to the winners. And I think in Citywire's sense, we try to feature the lesser side seen things of the industry. So for instance, like women leaders in finance, we put a lot of focus on that, as well as emerging fund managers. And ESG teams. There's a big thing in our coverage right now.
Okay. Nicholas, what are your observations?
And I think to bounce off from Annabelle, I think the COVID-19 has brought up a lot of issues. So for example, like from what Annabelle said, we do have, and talking about ESG, for example, so these are metrics to measure a company's impact on the larger society, right? And so we have been talking on, water security and things like that from Citywire's point of view in terms of a magazine. And so we do bring that to focus as well. And so we do see a lot of trends becoming more pervasive as time goes on. So especially healthcare. I think healthcare is a really huge issue, and of course other social issues like human rights and things like that. So yeah, and so we do try to identify these trends and to talk on them to a certain extent.
Okay.
And to your point about, capitalism, I think for us, something that's very interesting, I think has been that fund managers have actually been sponsoring projects on Citywire from time to time, but these actually further our goals. So for instance, we do like ESG specials that highlight certain issues. So from that sense, we get the backing to do what we actually want, which I think is quite unique to Citywire. It's not really in the mainstream media as such.
Exactly. And I want to talk about ESG in a while. But for now, I want to just ask you something on behalf of the IPRS community. Now, a lot of our members are actively looking for platforms for media outlets to partner with in storytelling on behalf of the brands they represent. What should practitioners keep in mind when they approach you with an interview opportunity?
I think we get a lot of emails as journalists, and I can get up to like 200 a day at Citywire. So if I don't respond to you, like maybe the phone is not the best way. I think the best way is sending a follow-up email, because sometimes over the phone, even if you tell me over the phone, I may forget it in an hour later. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. Yeah.
Okay, so emails work best for you.
Yeah, for me personally, I think for other journalists, we each have our own preferences, which is a nightmare. But yeah.
Okay. What about you, Nicholas? When you're working on a report and you're lining up people to interview, how can PR practitioners best work with you to get their brands or to get their brand's point of view into the reports that you're working on?
So I think one way would be to send an email and to tell us what the agenda is, so we can better prepare for the interview. So I have been interviewing quite a few people so far during the COVID-19 situation, and I find that it really helps when they tell me the agenda beforehand and they give me questions, and likewise, I give them questions as well. So we do work on the same page, and I think that really helps.
And do the both of you work off an editorial calendar, which practitioners can gain access to, so that they can, when they feed stories to you or they share interview opportunities with you, they would be able to do that in line with what your magazine is looking for over a particular period?
In terms of magazine, there are different sections there's a standard list of sections. So for instance, we will always have a family office story, we will always have an ESG story, we will always have a story on products, always have a cover story with the CEO of a private bank. But in terms of day-to-day coverage on our website, it's very ad hoc. We decide that at maybe 9:30 in the morning every day, and we just run with it, because we have 2 newsletters, one at 3:30 and then next at 10:30 in the morning. So it's really every day we change. We see what the themes are, what's the latest news. It's very on the fly for online.
I see. Okay. And what can our community learn from PR practitioners who get it right when they work on those executive interview opportunities with you? You mentioned you just spoke to somebody from UBS. What does a good interview look like for you?
A good interview looks like, for me, is when I send over the guidelines. Usually I'll send over maybe 5 questions that kind of frame the interview as I would like it to be. So if the executive had time to look at those questions and prepare that would be very helpful. I think that's all I can ask for. It's something like the executive will answer it to the best of his or her ability. And I think that's a sign of a good interview for me.
I'm curious now, are PR practitioners, in your view, gatekeepers or bottlenecks?
Oh no, Marcus, you're going to make a lot of people dislike me for this conversation. As a journalist, I always like to go straight to the source. So I think, I won't say bottlenecks, but if I had direct access, that would be great. But I do enjoy working with PR people. I've met a lot of nice people in the industry. Sometimes they help you angle stories that you have not really thought about before. So I think that's the plus point of having PR practitioners.
Okay. No offense taken at all. Because as you pointed out earlier, I think it makes a difference when a spokesperson is adequately prepared for an interview. And oftentimes, it is the PR practitioner that helps with that preparation.
Yeah.
So I think you also acknowledge that there is value that PR practitioners bring to the entire process. And thank you for that. So for those of you who have just joined this IPRS Meet the Media Town Hall, we are delighted to have Annabelle Liang and Nicholas Nghai from Citywire. Citywire is an important publication for businesses looking to reach movers and shakers of the fund and wealth management community. Please post your questions for Annabelle and Nicholas on our group chat or the Q&A function, and we will try to cover them today. Annabelle and Nicholas, I just want to revisit what we were talking about earlier about redefining capitalism in this purpose-driven era. Now high on the agenda of investors today are businesses that have a good record in environmental, social, and governance initiative, or ESG for short. We spoke about that very briefly earlier. Studies show that over 75% of business executives recognize that these initiatives create corporate value in the long term. 69% of them place a much greater importance in investing in companies that show a high level of corporate social responsibility. And globally, responsible investing is up 25% over the last 2 years to the tune of $23 trillion. The green bond market has reached $300 billion by the end of 2018, nearly double its value from 2017. Now, what do these trends mean for businesses, and does this signal an inflection point for corporate brands who are purpose-driven?
I think the rising trends of ESG is very comforting, especially given the current pandemic. I think it's really shone a light on many issues that we're facing today. And so I think I recently came off a talk with a fund management company. I believe it's Hermes, and what they mentioned was that there is an increasing use of the word impact investing rather than ESG, because the problem with ESG is that a company can be overweighted on E, S, or G, and so you don't really have a holistic view on whether a company is impacting the society at large in a good way. And so I think impact investing is going to stay, and in fact I think it's going to increase over time. And I think from what I've seen so far in the markets, I think it's also a risk avoidance tool. And so people who invest in ESG companies, they can avoid companies with bad practices. So for instance, we have seen Facebook not doing so well on the ESG metrics about sometime last year or 2018, when the data privacy issue was coming up. And so if you were to base your investments off these metrics, I think you can avoid potential situations like that. And I think to answer your question, we do see ESG bringing good returns. I think the myth that if you want to create a global impact through your investments and you have to sacrifice returns, I think that's a myth that is long gone. I think the industry still has to work on this to some extent, but I mean, what better way, right? You can solve global critical needs and also generate alpha. And so we have seen ESG investments increasing, outperforming the benchmark actually by as much as 10%. So I think that's really interesting.
I think, yeah, I mean, outperforming the benchmark, it's doing well. People will power into ESG investments. But I also think it presents an opportunity for family offices that are not so, some of them have told me that they are not so like profit driven in this current environment as investors. So they don't mind putting money into a company that is not doing very well during COVID per se. But they know that, their goals are sustainable. They believe in the company's plan for the future, and they don't mind putting their money in it. So I don't think it's just economics at play right now. For family offices, it's a lot about what they believe in, the companies they want to back. They want to sort of like build a brand for their family and guard the family's wealth for generations to come. So I think they have their eye on the very, very, very long term right now.
So it's interesting that you talk about brand building, because here we are seeing a clear line connecting the type of investment decisions that these family offices are making and how it actually builds the brand reputation of these family offices and the entities that are so associated with it. The other observation I think that you also shared is now there is a mutual benefit of looking at companies that are doing good and doing well at the same time. So it's not mutually exclusive, right? You don't have to sacrifice profit for people or people for the planet. You can achieve all of it at the same time, and the financial market is recognizing it because it's essentially companies that are ESG friendly are essentially here to stay for the long term. Is that the sentiment that you get to?
Yeah, more like companies that are not ESG friendly will do terribly in the long term. I think that is what scares people more.
Okay. Okay. I'm taking some questions from the floor now. So the first question is, how many of your stories, maybe in percentage, do you independently identify yourselves and you create yourselves and you go after these opportunities? And what is the percentage of stories that are brought to you by comms people? Annabelle?
Brought to me by comms. Do you count like press releases as brought to me by comms?
Yeah,
Probably,
so
right?
press releases or even pitches, media interviews that are, and proactively reached out, that comms people reach out to you for.
I think it will be 60-40, 60% being brought by comms people, because a lot of our news is very hard and fast. So we do that based on press releases. And the other 40% for bigger features, we reach out directly to the companies and fund managers and family officers. Yeah. 60-40 is my balance.
Okay, and does it work differently for you, Nicholas, when you conduct your research and analysis for reports that you put together?
And so it doesn't really apply to me, I think, when pertaining to the question of reporting, because I don't really do that. But what we do in the research team is that we do take our directives from above. So we do identify trends, and we, as researchers, we do secondary research and of course primary research. So we do go out of our way to meet people in the industry, what their sentiments are, what their trends are, what are some of the things that they are witnessing in the industry, and we try to collate that in a meaningful way. So I think recently we are doing a white paper on independent asset managers and family offices as well. So
great. Okay, so there are several students who are in the audience, and they will soon be graduating armed with communication degrees. Annabelle, you have a degree in journalism from the Wee Kim Wee School at NTU. And Nicholas, you have a degree in communications and sociology from the University at Buffalo. Now, how important are academic credentials in equipping you with the right processes and skills in both your careers?
I think my degree was very important in the sense that Wee Kim Wee gave us the opportunity to intern with a newspaper or a newswire for 6 months. I think that was a very good experience. Plus, your projects are always very hands-on. So I think that was very important for me to get a head start into journalism. You meet people in the industry before you come out of school. And that really gave me a head start.
Yeah, so for me, I think the biggest takeaway from communications is really, the skills I took away from writing and the way I organize my ideas. And I think that really comes into play, especially at Citywire Asia, because, our readers and our audiences are quite data hungry. And so I'm able to organize information data in a coherent and concise way. I think my time at Buffalo really helps with that.
Okay, and aside from your professional pursuits, the both of you have interest in broader societal themes. Annabelle, you've written reports on the plight of fishermen in Southeast Asia. You wrote about North Korea and the Ishinomaki tsunami when that hit Japan in 2011. And Nicholas, you have always had an interest in sociology and social developments in Singapore. How have these areas of interest shaped you as a media professional who are reporting on the business and the commercial for the business and commercial communities?
I think I've always been a person who writes stories with my heart. So I think it's not always very easy to write a finance story with your heart because you're always guided by data. So I feel these other pursuits help balance it out. And also I have to go into every story with a fresh mind. I think that reminds me of that. Always try to be authentic, try to do the best story I can. I think that's something that I strive to do every day.
Yeah, and I think for me, I think you mentioned sociology. I think that I find that really, really interesting. And so what I can do at Citywire is to really put a twist on to see how the human factor comes into play. So for example, when it comes to ESG, we do understand that with the recent issues that people are becoming more passionate about these things. And that is probably one of the reasons why ESG is gaining traction over time. And so I am able to add that perspective in my research. And I think that really, really helps. Yeah.
Okay, well, time has passed us by. It's close to 5:30. I promised that we would keep this to half an hour. So this leads me to my last question. What is the relevance of a convening body like IPRS, and what does being a member of IPRS mean to media partners like yourselves?
I mean, it's always good to keep in touch with the industry. I haven't really gotten a chance to meet a lot of people during this COVID outbreak, so it's especially nice that we have this platform to talk and share in these times. And even out of these, I'm always out networking. I'm always out meeting people. So the more networks, the better. The more networks, the more stories. So that's how I see it from my perspective.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? I think I got
What is the relevance of IPRS as a convening body for media practitioners like yourselves?
I think for me, just like Annabelle, I'm not reporting that much as her. Of course, I'm doing research, but I do have my fair share of interactions with PR members as well. And I think IPRS as a convening body will help to boost the PR members. I think that really, really helps when it comes to getting information from them, getting future interactions as well. And I think for our case, I do audience development also besides research. And so what I do is I meet stakeholders and I meet private bankers and I meet people of relevance and to get them together to join our Citywire events. So I think PR practitioners can also, rather than being gatekeepers, as you mentioned, I think that they can actually facilitate these interactions to a greater extent. And I think I look forward to that happening.
Great, thank you. And on that note, Annabelle and Nicholas, I'd like to thank you very much for telling us so much about Citywire and how practitioners can partner with you on engaging with your readers.